Everybody, welcome to our last lecture for the quarter, which will be covering the Old Master Final Painting that we'll be going over for this week, which will be under the Modules tab. So for our learning objectives, students will explore one artist's work to recreate their final paintings and their styles and techniques. Students can explore any concept and ideas like include narrative, figurative, iconography, abstraction, representation, political art, portraiture, and surrealism. Students will demonstrate similar painting techniques using a similar style and color scheme that matches the intended mood of their artist. Students will demonstrate a balance of color, composition, and aesthetics from highlights and shadows. Now, part of this process is that we'll have a list of artists that you will be assigned to, that you are going to be researching as well as sort of investigating their styles and techniques, but also sort of to learn from their approaches, from their subject matter, from their process, as well as sort of to explore their kind of technical as well as their conceptual ideas for your actual final painting. Now, you may choose any of the artist's work that you can use as a source of reference. But what I want everybody to realize is that we are creating our own concept with the style of our assigned artist under the modules tab, if that's clear. So for our materials needed, again, we're going to be using our Blick Studio Stretch Cotton Canvas, the traditional profile 16 by 20 or larger. You have your Blick canvas pads, 12 by 16, 10-pack sheets to practice with. Our Utrecht acrylic paints, all 10 colors. Our sort of value brush sets, so which will include all of the sort of numbers set of 1 through 7. Our slow drying medium, a cup of water, mainly for cleaning, and then finally our ruler for any grids or measuring that we need for our painting. And part of this also too is to incorporate all of our learning objectives with our final, but also to sort of see what have we learned from the still life painting, the color wheel, as well as the landscape painting, in order to then sort of create our final painting for the quarter. Now, a key aspect of your paintings is to incorporate what you have discovered when researching your individual artists to create your own final painting. Consider their styles, process, concept, color relationships, and a reflection upon their work when researching. Students will select one or two works of art and recreate their final paintings in a similar style and techniques from their artist. Now you can kind of sort of see here, this is the artist Angela Dufresne, who's also an American artist who's based in, I believe, is Providence, Rhode Island. She still actually is a living and working artist at RISD. And what's fascinating about her work is that it's extremely not only sort of loose, but also sort of in this very monumental large scale, about 132 inches wide. And it sort of incorporates a variety of sort of subject matters and figuration and sort of just really wonderful styles of large scale brush techniques, as well as sort of more expressive painterly techniques that she incorporates. She's a fascinating artist that I've actually had the pleasure to meet, but also is a wonderful artist to look at for a sense of inspiration. Another artist would be to sort of see Julie Hefferman, who's also another American artist. This is her self-portrait gatherer, another large oil scale oil painting that she worked on. And this is interesting because she used a lot of history genre paintings within some of her work, as well as incorporating herself as sort of the main protagonist in the painting. What I love about it is sort of this blend of this hyper realistic reality of sort of incorporating realism and as well as surrealism, but also sort of giving this really interesting blend to this other dreamlike sort of spiritual world, which are really kind of fun to watch. Susanna Coffey is an artist from America who's based in I believe in Chicago, Illinois. And what I love about her work is just the sort of incorporating the use of positive and negative space. And what's interesting is that a majority of her self-portraits are, of course, involving herself, but the models that she uses are just so beautifully painted with this sort of blend between this figure as well as the sort of looking at her, just their main subject to the background. Andrea Ngini is sort of an artist from Romania who sort of also incorporates this kind of really interesting, a bit of sort of surrealism as well as sort of abstraction to kind of make this really more sort of monumental scale of some of his paintings. A lot of his work is very politically driven as well, but he's just a very kind of interesting artist to kind of see how one can sort of incorporate sort of figurations and abstracts as a combination of one single painting. Julie Meritu is an artist from Ethiopia, but is also sort of was raised in the United States. I think she now resides in Berlin. And it's interesting to sort of see these sort of ways that she incorporates some of her work as almost as a typographer. And it's interesting to sort of see this as a series of maps and geometric shapes that can incorporate this kind of a really interesting composition by just very sort of simple and clean lines as well as sort of fun, bright colors. Jose Lerma is an artist from, I believe he's from Spain. And it's interesting to sort of see he's also based in Chicago, Illinois, that also sort of has this really fun sort of blend with themes and subjects of these figures, but also in a very sort of loose, kind of almost comical way. They almost seem like sort of illustrations as well as like comic book sort of paintings and drawings. Walton Ford is an American artist who also works with a lot of sort of wild animals within some of his work. A lot of the sort of grandiose, sort of more monumental, maximal sort of concepts he uses is sort of interesting to see in this very sort of, again, hyper realistic sort of representation of these animals from the wild. But they also have this really kind of interesting blend of color, as well as sort of incorporating the sort of ideas of humor, irony, and satire. He's an interesting artist to look at. And I've also added his R21 video listed on the bottom for those of you who might be interested to kind of research some of his work on your own. But I highly recommend checking out his work online. Shazia Sikander is an artist from Pakistan who also resides in the US. And it's interesting, she uses a lot of miniature, smaller paintings within some of her work that do incorporate this blend of including her sort of religion as a Muslim artist, but also sort of incorporate her culture as a Pakistani artist living and working in the Middle East as well as the US. Kind of a blending those sort of the two concepts together, but also sort of working with those ideas of stereotypes and sort of thinking about this ideas of the veil or ideas of the lens in terms of sort of the male or the female gazes and how that sort of works culturally throughout the countries that she's lived in. Marilyn Minter is a very interesting artist who lives in Washington, D.C. Excuse me. She actually, one, two, three. Marilyn Minter is a Los Angeles-based artist who actually works with a lot of photography, with a lot of fashion houses and models, and sort of incorporates sort of very glitzy, glamorous kind of shots of like some of her images and references that she uses that she actually paints from directly onto her large-scale paintings. And this is a sort of a massive painting, about 15 feet wide, completed in 2009, that's sort of using enamel on metal surface, which is just remarkable to sort of see. Larry Pittman is an artist from the US who's incorporating these ideas of stereotypes between being a member of the LGBTQ community, but also to sort of to see those stereotypes of how this idea of gay culture is in Los Angeles, but also sort of to incorporate this sort of really interesting sort of forms of illustration as well as abstraction and these really interesting kind of more sort of subtle ways. Kim Jong-ji is an artist from South Korea. He unfortunately passed away in 2022 from, I believe, he had a sort of a medical brain aneurysm, which unfortunately sort of, with this tragedy of his loss, we've sort of lost a very good, fascinating illustrator, comic book artist, and more sort of surrealist painter, all working from memory. All of the things that you can see from some of his work, it actually comes from directly, or actually came from his head, which is remarkable to sort of see. With his use of scientific perspective, incorporating sort of scale, proportion, value, elements of sort of art and design, it's remarkable to see how detailed, but also sort of how grandiose some of his works are. Chuck Close is an American artist who is an alum of sort of our sort of wonderful state of Washington, which is wonderful to sort of see. He also sort of was one of the godfathers of sort of incorporating photorealism to some of his work. The self series or sort of the self-portrait series that he worked on really sort of embody this sort of hyper realistic sort of quality to his portrait of himself here, but is including himself as the main subject to kind of show us this sort of almost technical skill of the artist's willingness to sort of incorporate realism instead of using photography. Lisa Corinne Davis is an artist from the US who also sort of incorporates a lot of abstraction and geometric patterns. In a way, they almost seem like cityscapes or landscapes that we can look at from an aerial perspective downwards from a city plan or an urban landscape. It's interesting to sort of see this in relationship to space, but also it's fascinating a lot of the patterns and sort of geometric forms and kind of tonal variations of these grays and colors and kind of other tones move between our physical foreground background and sort of middle ground. Gerhard Richter is an artist from Germany. He also sort of incorporates a lot of realism as well as abstraction. He's a real sort of interesting artist that incorporates a variety of techniques, processes, but also incorporates photography, sculpture, painting, drawing, as well as sort of other sort of mixed medias to create his work. Ellen Alfreds is an artist from the US who also works with a lot of representation. And it's interesting, the more minute details of these figurations are just so beautifully painted. That really gives us this kind of focus and attention to the figure, the texture of skin, the way in which sort of the veins can be sort of colored in a sort of lighter blue, but also sort of blend into the fleshiness of the tones of the skin, the wrinkles of the hands, but also the sort of texture of the fabric that the figure is sitting on. It's quite remarkable. Carrie James Marshall is an artist from the US who also sort of incorporates this idea of the black figures within the concepts of history genre paintings. It's interesting to sort of see that he really is a wonderful contemporary artist that works with this sort of process of sort of creating a variations of darker tones for skin. And it's interesting to sort of see that we don't really see a sort of just a black figure, but it's a variety of tonal variations that he uses, but also sort of giving us this commentary of Black America today in terms of the concept of American culture. Anne Harris is an artist from Chicago who also uses a lot of sort of figurative work within herself. I just love this portrait of this figure here. Portrait in the red robes, an oil linen painting. It was done in 2012 that she created of sort of just this figure here, which I just find almost remarkable. It's very indicative to sort of compare this to COVID that we all know and sort of remember as a time of our history that we can kind of see we're all, locked down at home, but also sort of, also sort of bored out of our minds, right? Lucian Freud is an artist from the UK who's also sort of incorporating a lot of figurations within his work. What I love about his paintings is that there's this blend of sort of incorporating this looseness of his brushstrokes with very thick layers of paint. But he was also known sort of to paint the portrait of the Queen that recently also passed away a few years ago, that he is known for. Tala Mahdi is an Iranian American artist who works with a lot of sort of monochromatic color combinations. It's interesting from some of the works that you see, the light actually of these colors from these spotlights on the top of the half of the painting really kind of showcase this directness of the tonal variations of where the figures are, as well as sort of giving us a sense of scale as well as perspective in terms of its atmosphere. Raksha Downs is an artist from the UK who also sort of incorporates a lot of sort of plein air approaches, goes to site-specific locations and actually creates a lot of his paintings from plein air, directly from observation. And then he brings those paintings actually to his studio and actually paints them from his drawings. One of my favorite artists, this is Jenny Saville, who's also an artist from the UK. And it's interesting to kind of incorporate this really fascinating, almost painterly deliciousness of these layers of paint. And it almost seems like the figure is about to come to life. And it's beautifully painted to kind of sort of see this blend of abstraction as well as realism, but giving us the subtlety of the kind of how they merge together in terms of their subject matter. Gandhi Wiley is an artist from the US, also sort of incorporates a lot of sort of history genre paintings within his work, but giving us the narrative of black figures in history paintings from the sort of Royal Academy, but also sort of being incorporating in a more sort of contemporary way of using these figures as his main subject. Now, a sort of technical aspect with throughout this process is to incorporate the grid and how to use a grid on top of your photographic reference, which is optional. Now, the first thing you want to be able to do is sort of draw a sort of your first line on the bottom left corner and connect them to the top right. Second thing you want to do is be able to sort of incorporate the top left corner to the bottom right as your vertical line and your sort of horizontal line, dividing the reference into two. but also will help you solidify and find the center of the painting. You want to repeat the process all over for all four squares, which will help as a guide for you then to sort of create your actual physical painting. Now, you want to be able to do this not only a reference, but on your actual painting. But then what's important is to remember the sort of orientation that you also use. So keep that in mind. If a reference is in portrait, your painting should be in portrait. If your image or your photographic reference is in landscape, your painting should be in landscape orientation. So keep that in mind. Let's look at some examples from students' works, which also kind of give you guys some ideas of what you can do throughout this whole process, right? These are sort of a really interesting sort of blends of two. And I want us to kind of get this subject matter to kind of have more fun in terms of the freedom and subject that you want to be exploring, right? Have kind of more sort of experimentation to sort of see what sort of subject or ideas are you interested in, right? You can kind of see these two are both inspired by Candy Wiley, but you can see each student sort of incorporating themselves as the main subject, right? All of this is a part of the learning process, right? I want us to sort of be able to sort of see what can we learn from our artists? How can we incorporate, let's say, for example, an artist like Gerhard Richter, out of what this portrait of this painter did here, right? And this is important to sort of recognize what it is that we've learned throughout the quarter. From the beginning of our still life paintings to our landscape paintings, how can we then incorporate it ourselves, right? And this is all depending on what subject you're interested in. Now, unfortunately, we don't have too much time to be working on this assignment, but I want us to be able to sort of explore any subject at any time, right? Now, all of these are also sort of incorporating self-portraits that you are more than happy to incorporate with, but remember, it is really up to you, right? Throughout this process, feel free to send a email or message at on Canvas at any time. But remember, those of you who sort of email me late, you have to sort of just be a little patient. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Here's some more examples here. Here's some more sort of recent examples. I think this is a subject that the artist took of themselves and a friend at a beach. I believe this is last year. And again, you could see how diverse some of these subjects and ideas are, right? I want us to have fun with this and see what we can do. Now, by the end, students will be submitting the two following. Well, a well-documented photographic reference online under the assignment tab, and your completed Old Master final painting. We'll be doing this online, unfortunately, because if we're going to be doing this in person, we won't be on campus. So make sure to do that online, not in person, by the end of our due date. Okay. If students have additional questions or concerns, please let me know and let me have enough time to get back to you within 48 hours at least to your message. All right, everybody, that is the end of our lecture.